Good afternoon. I call this meeting of a panel of the North Carolina State Board of Education's Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee, EICS, to order. The purpose of today's meeting is to hear an appeal by Cape View Leadership Academy from the December 8, 2025 decision by the Charter Schools Review Board to deny Cape View Academy a charter. Today is Tuesday, February 3rd, 2026. The time is 4 p.m. The hearing is being conducted in person at the Department of Public Construction building located at 301 North Wilmington Street in Raleigh. It is also being live streamed by DPI for the public. Public notice of the meeting has been properly given. I am John Blackburn. I will serve as chair of the panel hearing today. The other panel members present to hear the appeal today are my state board colleagues, Ms. Jill Kamnitz and Mr. Alan Duncan. All three of us are members of the State Board of Education and have been duly appointed by the chairman of the State Board of Education to this panel to hear this matter on behalf of the full State Board of Education and make a recommendation to that body. I want to welcome those in attendance and those listening to the proceedings. Panel members, you are reminded that it is our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of the appeals panel. I want to ask each panel member if you're aware of any conflict that might disqualify you from hearing this matter, or aware of anything else that would keep you from fairly and impartially hearing this appeal. Ms. Kamnitz, do you have any conflicts of interest in this matter?
No, I do not.
Can you be fair and impartial in this matter?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Mr. Duncan, do you have any conflicts of interest in this matter?
No, I do not.
Can you be fair and impartial in this matter?
Yes, I can.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. And I do not have any conflicts of interest and state for the record that I can be fair and impartial in this matter. Next, I would like to take a few minutes to share the procedure for the hearing today. Each side will be given up to 30 minutes to present its case and may reserve up to 5 minutes of that time for rebuttal following the main presentation. The panel members may ask questions of the parties either during or after the presentations. At the conclusion of the presentations, the panel will deliberate and vote on a recommended decision to be presented to the full State Board of Education at its February 4th, 5th, 2026 meeting. At its February meeting, the State Board of Education will make a final decision at this time on this matter. At this time, I'd like to call on my fellow DPI members to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Tiffany Lucas, General Counsel to the State Board of Education and the Department of Public Instruction.
Rupen Fafaria, Director of State Board Operations and Policy.
Thank you both. Welcome. Now I'd like to invite the Charter School Review Board to make its presentation as to the reasons for its decision that is the subject of this appeal. And we will keep the time. Ms. Lucas will keep the time. Ms. Logue, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Blackburn, Ms. Kamnitz, Mr. Duncan. Thank you for taking your time this afternoon. My name is Ashley Logue. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Charter Schools, representing the CSRB, Charter Schools Review Board, in an appeal from a charter school applicant, Cape View Leadership Academy. I will likely refer to the applicant as either applicant, appellant, or Cape View. My remarks will begin with a brief contextual background of the North Carolina charter school application process, a summary of the Cape View application and evaluation, and conclude with a review of the CSRB interview at which the application was denied. I believe this will show that despite the appellant's apparent contention that a management company application is guaranteed 30 complete, separate, uninterrupted minutes of interview time, that is simply not a requirement of policy, process, or law. Further, there is no requirement that CSRB have multiple reasons or reasons that an applicant agrees with in order to deny an application. Application background. Cape View applied to become a North Carolina charter school during the 2025 cycle, which closed on April 25th, 2025. The applicant projected an opening date of fall 2027, serving 414 students at full capacity and spanning grades 6 to 12 in Pender County. The North Carolina Office of Charter Schools manages the charter school application process, and the 2025 window ran from January 31st to April 25th. It requires a written application and a $1,000 fee, which is used to fund external evaluators. Applicants first undergo a completeness check, then they are assigned to internal and external evaluators for review. The Cape View application met the initial requirements, and its application was assigned for evaluation. Charter school applicants are authorized by the North Carolina Charter Schools Review Board, otherwise known as CSRB. From June through August, internal and external evaluators evaluate the applications on our Edlusion platform, rating each as either exceeds, meets, or does not meet standard, each section of the application. Upon completion, Edlusion generates a summary feedback document outlining the evaluation remarks, or sometimes an evaluator will pose questions for clarity, and this is shared with the applicant ahead of their interview, which begin in September. They are also made available to CSRB members and to the public via eBoard. Evaluation of each charter application includes rating and feedback from 2 external evaluators and 1 OCS staff evaluator. In addition, the summary feedback document includes ratings and commentary from members of DPI's exceptional children and multilingual staff. Evaluators have the opportunity to provide feedback throughout the application, and at the conclusion of each section, they must rate this section, and then they can provide additional commentary as like a summary comment. Following the written evaluation, applications are set for interview. So that's the background context of what the application process looks like. So who are the parties in this appeal? As you know, charter schools are operated by nonprofit boards. The applicant here is the CVLA board, or Cape View Leadership Board. In North Carolina, charter agreements are between the state and the school's nonprofit board of directors, not between management companies and the state. That means the board bears ultimate responsibility for the school's success. Management company contracts, by contrast, can expire, be terminated, or be renegotiated, all of which we've seen play out here in North Carolina. Because of this, the CSRB places significant weight on a board's ability to strongly advocate and govern its own application, independent of any management company involvement. This is important to bear in mind as the appellant focuses much of its argument on the supposed infringement on the EMO's interview time. Who is the EMO? The Cape View application indicated that the board would partner with Excel Schools as the educational management organization, an EMO. Excel Schools is a for-profit management company with a multi-state charter school portfolio. The majority of their schools are located in Ohio. And OCS conducts due diligence reports for all new management companies entering the state. This is a new management company that does not operate any schools in North Carolina or any charter schools in North Carolina. The due diligence report was provided to CSRB and is available publicly via eBoard. OCS conducts due diligence on behalf of the CSRB for any new market entrants to protect the public interest and ensure responsible stewardship of public funds. When a company seeks to enter a regulated market, especially one involving taxpayer funds, the state has an obligation to verify the applicant possesses the financial stability, operational capacity, and management expertise needed to succeed. That said, staff makes every effort to compile information from a diverse range of sources as possible to provide a comprehensive picture of the applicant. In this case, Excel Schools LLC maintains corporate filings in multiple states, operates schools in over a dozen states, runs brick and mortar and virtual schools, and often rebrands or assumes failing schools, making the corporate structure, partner companies, and the breadth of the corporation difficult to parse. So the due diligence report attempts to cover a wide breadth of this corporation's geographic and operational span, drawing from available public information to give CSRB members a resource. This is to help them understand the organizational structures of a new EMO seeking to do business in North Carolina. This report is not designed as a final judgment, but as a tool that enables board members to identify areas they may want to clarify, request additional information, or pursue in further discussion in the interview. This approach ensures that board members are well informed and can engage meaningfully with applicants, and that any concerns or questions that arise from the due diligence findings can be addressed in the interview. Any errors are unintentional, and if the CSRB members find a particular item of concern, they are able to address that in the interview. Often the due diligence reports, as was the case here, are not discussed in detail, indicating that the CSRB members had little concern with its content. Their contents were on other matters which will be discussed shortly. While appellant argues that OCS cherry-picked application evaluations, we have provided the full application record, including all evaluative remarks, positive, neutral, and negative. However, I will now identify specific deficiencies that board members could have reasonably relied on in voting to deny the application. CSRB board members are not required to explicitly state every reason for their denial votes. Given the application spans hundreds of pages and CSRB members spend months reviewing materials and preparing for interviews, it is unreasonable to expect that every aspect of the application would be examined or discussed during a 90-minute interview. Rather, CSRB members take all information into account to make a final decision in a public meeting on an application. The application itself, summary feedback, evaluator remarks, supporting documentation, and the interview itself. So what did the evaluator remarks say? DPI exceptional children's staff rated the educational plan as does not meet standard. One external evaluator rated the educational plan as does not meet standard. While the full evaluatory remarks are provided in the record, they identified two major areas of concern: special education and disability services, significant deficiencies in planning for students with disabilities, including incomplete identification of students needing services, failure to adequately describe how FAPE or free appropriate public education will be provided, and lack of clarity on supports for both special education students and multilingual learners. They also noted that the budget and staffing for their services are unclear, things that will again arise in the interview. CTE program implementation. The application lacks clear explanation of how the school's CTE mission, this is career and technical education, will be implemented, including an unclear alignment between mission and vision in the ed plan, insufficient detail on the hybrid model, no plan for transitioning incoming students, vague CTE focus despite letters of support suggesting aviation connections, and unclear how the school will ensure qualified teachers, work-based learning opportunities, and schedule accommodation. Finally, failure to explain how this school will improve upon Pender County's already high-ranking CTE program. Moving to the financial plan, one external evaluator rated this does not meet standard, noting that there are several components missing or do not align. The applicant should review the financial plan, including the allotted staff for the targeted population, and to provide more evidence of the agreement with a cell, including their financial safeguards and processes. So those are the written evaluation remarks. There were positive ones. Of course, these are the ones that does not meet the standard. And you will see these also come up in the interview. Following application evaluations, an interview of the applicant board is scheduled with CSRB. Melanie Rackley is a lead OCS staff member for authorizing and applications. She corresponded with the CVLA board primarily through email to schedule its interviews, copies of which have been provided in the record. On July 30th, 2025, the board was provided a save the date for November 2025 interview date. The applicant board shared difficulty with this timing and requested a change. We offered alternative dates of either December 8th or 9th, and they selected December 8th. On October 8th, Ms. Rackley confirmed via email the interview would take place on December 8th, and also included the summary feedback and an interview process guideline document. A final reminder was sent on December 1st. The timeline is important to show that had there been questions about a supposed separate EMO interview, there were several months available to address those with staff who hold office hours, are easily available via phone and email, and provide resources to applicants. Now I'd like to address the applicant's first argument that the CSRB failed to follow its own procedures, denying the board and a cell an opportunity to be heard. The appellant's request rests on the contention that the applicant would be given a separate opportunity to present. The board did not provide that opportunity during the interview and therefore violated its own long-standing process in doing so. I will address this in three parts. First, there are significant differences between the words separate and additional. Consider a job interview scheduled for 1 hour. If a candidate is told they will receive additional time, that means the interview is extended to more time. But it all takes place in the same session with the same interviews following the same format. If, on the other hand, a candidate is told they will receive a separate session, that implies a distinct standalone interview. The difference matters because additional simply means more time within an existing framework, and separate implies a distinct and independent opportunity. These are meaningfully different expectations, and relying on one to satisfy a promise of the other would not be reasonable. The additional interview time for applicants, number two, the additional interview time for applicants with a proposed management company is given as a courtesy and is not, in fact, a longstanding practice. And three, charter application interview duration and structure is not dictated by policy or law, nor are there any rights to separate time-specific EMO interviews during this process. So let's take a look at separate versus additional. It is telling that the appellant uses the word separate when arguing his case, but when referring accurately to both the source material from OCS and specifically to OCS Ms. Rackley's remarks during the interview introduction, appellant uses the word additional. That is because OCS consistently uses the word additional, describing the interview structure as a standard 1-hour interview with an extra 35 minutes allotted for EMO applicants. That word is also important, applicants. Ms. Rackley's announcement at the beginning simply referenced additional time, not a separate session. This language is deliberate and reflects the actual procedure. New EMO partners receive more interview time, not a standalone presentation disconnected from the applicant's interview. In the guidance document outlining the structure and time guidelines for an interview, the language is clear. It states, applicants, meaning the board, partnering with a management company will receive an additional 30 minutes of time. The applicant is the board, not the EMO. The additional 30 minutes is a courtesy given to management organizations after finding that during prior interview cycles in either the CSRB or CSAB, the prior board, members often felt there was not enough time to dig into the meat of applications with management organizations that are often very complex and raise substantial concerns about finances, fees, leases or facility, and partnership agreements. Put simply, there is no requirement or guarantee that a management company will receive its own interview or even a portion of the interview. How much time an EMO received is based on how the interview is proceeding, what questions the CSRB raises, and or if the applicant specifies it would like the EMO to speak to certain matters. Appellant states our submitted findings of fact acknowledge the CSRB, quote, promised a cell it would receive 30 minutes to present. As the reference for that supposed promise is our findings of fact statement on page 4. Which, quote, is applicants with proposed management organizations, as was the case with CVLA, are allotted an additional half-hour interview time. It's difficult to ascertain how that statement of additional time equates to a promise to an EMO for 30 minutes to present during an applicant board's interview. Second, the appellant's claim that a separate EMO presentation is longstanding practice is simply inaccurate. This accommodation began in 2024 and was introduced as a courtesy to applicants given the added complexity of EMO applications, not as an established procedural requirement. It is not codified in any law, policy, or written procedure, and no rule prescribes a specific format or amount of time given to an EMO applicant. The review board allocated 90 minutes of total interview time, 50% more than the standard interview, which fully satisfies its obligation to accommodate a new EMO partner. That the board, the CVLA board, the applicant board, did not effectively utilize that additional time to present does not constitute a procedural failure by the review board. The additional time was provided, however, it was used in large part. How it was used, however, was in large part due to how the applicant's interview proceeded. Finally, charter application interview duration and structure are not dictated by policy and law. In fact, statute simply reads, and this is 115C 218.2, before section B, before taking action regarding a charter school or charter school applicant, including preliminary or final approval of charter applications, the review board or a committee of the review board shall provide an opportunity for the applicant or charter board member to address the review board or its committee, if present at a meeting. The interview duration and structure are set by the OCS in coordination with CSRB. Charter applicants are provided with this information during the scheduling of interviews well in advance of the interview. At no time preceding or during the interview did the applicant, Cape View leadership, ask clarifying questions or make a request regarding the interview structure and time allotted. So let's move to the interview that took place on December 8th. Dr. Rita Hare led that interview. She began the interview by explaining that the CSRB would interview the board members about the EMO, and particularly its selection of the EMO and the board's relationship with the selected EMO. The applicant posed no questions or clarifications following this direction. While I will note several problematic areas of the interview from an application strength standpoint, I want to address the statement that in its proposed findings of fact, OCS urges the state board not to focus on the review board's questions, but instead on the feedback comments included in materials by staff and contracted reviewers. That is false. Both evaluator comments and review board interview questions were included and both are substantive. Evaluator comments established that various reviewers found certain application areas did not meet standards, including expert DPI exceptional children reviewers. Review board questions, which I will now discuss, further illustrate the application's weakness. Cape View contends that allowing the EMO more speaking time would have resolved CSRB's questions, cleared up staff and evaluator feedback, and provided meaningful opportunity to respond. The interview itself, however, hopefully it's viewable on YouTube, shows over an hour of meaningful discussion and opportunity. Dr. Hare began by asking for clarification on the selection of the EMO as cell. And she stated the reason, she wanted some clarity because the EMO's established presence in North Carolina, which was stated as the reason in the application, had to be incorrect because they do not currently operate schools in North Carolina. The board chair stated that section of the application was a typo, and they understand the EMO is not operating in North Carolina on this time. She did, however, go on to explain that they selected a cell due to financial stability, ability to meet needs of targeted student populations, among other factors, ultimately selecting a cell for their experience and proven success. Dr. Hare asked about the EMO's alignment with the school's mission of serving 6th to 12th grade CTE education. The school's application is focused on career and technical education. That is the purpose and mission of this school. She asked, how will they, the EMO, fulfill the school's goals regarding CTE? A board member for the applicant addressed the board by speaking for 3 minutes regarding workforce development and work opportunities in Pender County. He spoke about economic development in the county, job creation, Pender County CTE statistics. At no time did the speaker address the actual question regarding the EMO or mention a cell whatsoever. But let's be clear, this is not a procedural failure on the part of CSRB. That was the applicant's answer to a clear question that CSRB members could have reasonably found unsatisfactory. The question was also related to the education plan, which, as previously stated, was found to be inadequate by 2 reviewers, and directly tied to the CTE mission alignment pointed out as an area of concern. CSRB continued with questions regarding the EMO, including Dr. John Elridge asking what the EMO's 15% fee includes. Ms. Isbell, who is the applicant board chair, stated educational materials such as curriculum, instructional tool selection, the AMP platform, business operations, marketing, student discipline, tech consulting services, and more. Mr. Friend then asked about numerous additional fees listed in the draft management company or agreement, including a provision that stated the school shall enter into furniture and equipment lease with the EMO. Mr. Friend asked for clarification as to whether that is in addition to the 15%. The board chair stated that there are additional fees that may be charged. She stated they are not required to go through a cell for these. And Mr. Friend said, well, it sounds like shall enter to indicates that you have no choice in the matter. The board chair stated that the contract is negotiable and that they have some final items to be worked through. So in the first few minutes of the interview, there are obvious questions about CTE alignment, which is the majority of the educational plan, and the budget. They continue to ask questions regarding the EMO and the draft agreement. There was significant discussion about this. Ms. Isbell spoke about a separate agreement that would take place between ESSEL and the board for a facility. Mr. Friend asked, is there a buyout agreement? He asked, what happens if something goes wrong with the EMO? Then you've lost the building. Ms. Isbell stated that they will work on a buyout agreement once they decide if they will build a new facility or lease something. Dr. Eldridge asked for clarity. Ms. Isbell stated that they haven't finalized it yet. Therefore, CSRB members would have to determine, in light of the interview as a whole, whether this lack of certainty weighed more towards approval or denial. Reasonable minds could find this lack of facility clarity concerning. Then they moved to the academic plan, including the provision of CTE. The CSRB asked questions regarding alignment of the permission to the CTE. There were questions regarding why a student would leave Pender County for a CTE program when the county is the second in state for CTE credentials, and for further specifics regarding ESSEL School's portfolio and the management organization's direct experience managing CTE schools. Dr. Rita Hare stated she had not heard information from the board as to why the board selected ESSEL for a CTE-focused school. She stated she had not seen a strong CTE component. Ms. Isbell, the board chair for the application, stated that she thinks Excel is bringing things like technology like AMP and iReady into a singular resource to build the right type of curriculum for the school. Dr. Hare stated that when she asked this question, each time it goes back to the county or community in general, and she stated, I have still not heard why the EMO Excel. Mr. Eric Gucan asked about EMO closures in Ohio. Ms. Isbell spoke about the issues related to each of those closures and stated that while it appears to be a high number, there were rationales and we took into account, and she also spoke about the timing of those, which she referenced were during COVID. CSRB members then inquired directly with the EMO representatives. Ms. Gifford, who is an ESL representative, EMO representative, was brought to the podium to answer questions regarding the facility lease arrangements. She stated that it's customary to have lease arrangements to allow the school to purchase their school buildings. Dr. Hare inquired about the exclusivity clause in the draft agreement. Ms. Gifford was still at the podium on behalf of the EMO, stating that it's the EMO's preference, but it could be negotiated. Dr. Hare also asked about CTE-focused schools in the EMO's portfolio, and Ms. Gifford stated there are 12 ranging in grade levels. Then they moved to the budget. There were significant concerns regarding the budget. One such concern has to do with a line item for other funds, totaling a significant amount ranging from $500,000 to over $1 million in later years. The board treasurer stated that those funds were, quote, not nailed down at this point. Dr. Hare stated that without other funds, they would have a very large deficit, so it needs to be from a secure source. The treasurer stated the EMO would pick up and help the school to make them financially stable if needed. Dr. Eldridge then voiced concerns about the small surplus and noted that removing other funds resulted in a large deficit. He noted the thin margin the school is running. Mr. Friend stated that the budget would show a deficit every year if the funds did not materialize. Further questions continued regarding the budget, including additional fees. Ms. Giffords for ESL for the EMO was able to respond to those. She stated that there are 3 separate fees. The AMP fee is $365 per student. The computer rental fee is $350 per student. IT support ranges of approximately 2 to 11,000 depending on student enrollment. Mr. Friend stated that the 15% includes things that are in the budget, but there's now extra fees. So he wanted to know, what is the 15%? He stated payroll, for example, in an EMO is EMO 101. Pretty much all EMOs handle payroll. Ms. Isbell stated that from a tech perspective, the only thing in the 15% fee is the consulting service of helping the board pick technology. A long discussion then continued with the EMO representative regarding if there's exclusivity requirements, if they are able to negotiate with the EMO on these things that the school would then have to purchase on top of the 15% fee. Ms. Gifford stated that they would work with the school to make sure they match or meet prices. Mr. Godby then stated that the budget does not include nearly enough for the fees for the technology, the $350, $365 per student fees after year 1. He stated it is woefully underfunded. Evaluators and members of the CSRB raised questions specific to where EC teachers were accounted in the submitted budget. There were questions regarding principal hiring and facility size. Mr. Sanchez asked for clarity regarding the facility costs, wondering if the projections, if there are projections and if they're based on the market rate, which Ms. Isbell for the applicant board confirmed. They went on to speak about whether there would be staff or board members working for the EMO. There would not be. And to speak about the value add of an $800,000 EMO fee in year 5 with 412 students. Mr. Sanchez specifically asked this. The board chair stated that the biggest value add is having an expert because with the exception of one board member, none are educators. The EMO had time to answer questions. There were significant concerns regarding the budget and the CTE alignment, among other things. Mr. Eldridge, however, moved to bring the applicant back for a second interview. Mr. Gay seconded. The motion failed, 2 in favor and 7 opposed. The only 2 in favor were the motion and the second. Dr. Hare, during the deliberation, expressed that the application is not ready. There are too many gaps, too many contradictions between the application and the management agree. Mr. Wall stated that the budget had significant concerns, that the fee seems like a lot of consultation when there needs to be, and then that needs to be acted on school staff. In year one, they only have one administrator and one clerical staff as the entirety of non-classroom staff. He stated administrators would need to shoulder an unrealistic burden when the EMO is not present in the school himself. And then Mr. Friend ended by saying that it was disconcerting that no one on the board had visited an ESL school. The application then went up for a second vote. Dr. Hare motioned to deny the application, and the motion passed 7 in favor and 2 opposed. The appellant states that the CSRB based its decision on incomplete or incorrect information. In this, he contends that the denial letter, they did contend that the denial letter written by OCS staff is inaccurate due to the list of reasons for denial. However, as we've just gone through, one reason, facility readiness, while it could have admittedly been worded better, perhaps facility clarity, there was significant discussion about lease agreements, buyout possibilities, and location of size of facility. The enrollment and financial viability related to the budget, and Dr. Eldridge stated, if 2 students don't come, you are in a deficit. You take that out, your budget doesn't work. 2 students. The ed plan, several areas reflected concerns, including CTE alignment. Teacher development and funding, questions were raised about EC staffing. Budgetary concerns, we talked a lot about that. And then teacher recruitment, questions were raised about Excel selecting the head of school, and Dr. Hare stating there was a contradiction between the app and the management agreement. All those things were covered in the interview or the evaluation remarks. All right. In my final minutes, the burden of clarity for an application rests with the applicant. It is the applicant's responsibility to submit a clear, comprehensive application that board members can evaluate without difficulty. If CSRB members found portions of the application confusing, contradictory, or inadequately explained, this confusion is in itself evidence of application deficiencies. The board is not required to fill gaps, make assumptions, or construct charitable interpretations of vague or poorly worded applications or interviews. The interview gave the applicant the opportunity to remedy this lack of clarity, and the EMO had an opportunity to speak. Secondly, there is no procedural remedy for substantive deficiency. The appellant argues that because board members were confused, they must have done something wrong procedurally. The proper conclusion is that an application that confuses expert board members, individuals experienced in reviewing charter applications and evaluating educational programs, is deficient on the merits. No proper procedural remedy can cure an application that fails to clearly articulate a viable plan for educating students with a CTE focus in a county that already provides some of the best CTE education in the state. And no additional time can cure a budget that has mystery, other line items, or additional fees stacked on top of a 15% management fee. The CSRB followed proper procedures by asking questions, seeking clarification, and ultimately concluding that the application did not meet the standards. We've already clarified there is no right to a separate EMO interview. The 1.5-hour time slot represents the maximum time allowed for an interview, not a mandatory amount of time that has to be exhausted. Procedures that allocate time for a hearing or an interview establish an outer limit to ensure efficiency and fairness, not a requirement that every second is being used. That would be absurd. The interview process is governed by the board members' need for information, not the clock. Once board members have asked all their questions, obtained the information, they can make a vote. The vote itself is a procedural next step contemplated by the board's rules. The board's procedures were followed. The applicant received the interview they were entitled to. Board members asked their questions, and when the board was ready to vote, they did so. And using less than the allotted time demonstrates efficiency, not procedural violation. No promised separate interview for an EMO exists in our processes, and a weak application or an interview does not indicate a procedural deficit or a mistake on the part of CSRB or OCS staff. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Logue. Now I'd like to invite the Cape View Leadership Academy representatives to make the presentation as to why they believe that the Charter School Review Board's decision denying the school a charter was an error.
Good afternoon. Matthew Tilley on behalf of Cape View Leadership Academy, and I am joined online by Justin May, the Vice Chair of the Cape View Leadership Academy, who's been assigned to, on behalf of their board, to oversee their appeal, and Mary Gifford, the Executive Vice President of Development for Excel Schools. First off, I want to start with this is a fairly new statute that we're under and a fairly new appeals process. In part, in respect to the state board's role, the statute says that your review is de novo, and that you may receive new information as part of your appeal. There's a reason for that. I do not have to demonstrate, and the applicant does not have to demonstrate a procedural or specific legal error to have you decide that the decision should be something else. Also, I would want to note that we're asking for something very narrow here, and there's a reason that we're asking for something very narrow. The only thing we are asking is for a remand, essentially, and to use appellate terms, to take this case and take this appeal and send it back. In doing that, we're asking to do what the review board deadlocked on a motion to do the next day after this application 5-5, and by Mr. Friend's motion, where he said that he thought that additional time to allow the applicant and to answer questions and to hear from the EMO would clarify issues both about the educational program and the EMO agreement. We agree that no law or policy requires that the EMO be provided a separate opportunity. Is it good practice? Yes. If you want to hear from the EMO about how the EMO is going to operate with the nonprofit board, the EMO can give you answers that are much more specific. They can also tell you what their practices are in other states, and they can respond to questions about their capacity and dealings in other states. That was important here. The question, though, isn't whether there's a guarantee of a separate 30 minutes, but what did everyone understand the procedure to be? And I'll quote at the 3:16 mark, Ms. Melanie Rackley at the beginning said there's 90 minutes allocated and time to interview the proposed management organization. She understood that the EMO would be separately and would be interviewed. At 3:58 on the timestamp, Chairman Friend indicated the same, halfway through the interview, indicated the same understanding. He said, just for clarification, the time we have for left is with the board, meaning the nonprofit board. We're going to still interview the EMO. The OCS says, well, one, there's no law or policy in its proposed findings of fact. That misses the issue. The issue is whether the board was told there would be a separate EMO time. That's important because there are things the EMO can answer, and both the applicant and the EMO are attempting to meet the board's procedure and decide when to answer certain questions and when to clarify. Ms. Logue made a very good point, and the board has made this over and over again, both in its public statements and its proceedings and outside, that it wants to hear from the board during the board portion of the interview to test the board's capacity. And that if the EMO is interjecting and answering questions during that time period, that it views that as a signal that the board is deferring too much to the EMO. That leads to an incentive and a very good reason to say for the EMO, wait your turn. If you are telling the EMO there's a separate time and then not providing it, you're creating a catch-22 where the EMO is waiting to answer those questions and then not given that opportunity. We have asked for a remand in this case largely because we think that that's the best way to get to a full and fair assessment of the application in an area, Pender County, where there are, according to the Office of Charter Schools, no charter schools. I think our Google search found what we thought may have been one within the borders, but none, with a very specific and innovative model that would provide CTE education tracked not from high school where it normally begins, but added to a leadership component in middle school that would track up with a lot of community partners, as demonstrated by the letters of support for the aviation program. That is something the EMO, why the EMO, all of those are important things, and getting it right is important. The EMO can best answer what its capacity is. It can best answer how it operates on the ground, and it can answer about its track record. I think that that's just good decision making, but I think that there's also a due process component here too. There is this due diligence report and staff comments. There is no procedure, as Ms. Logue outlined, to respond to those, either in writing or a separate time to do so. The due diligence report deals with the EMO's operations in other states. This due diligence report had clear errors. It included stories about Stride K-12, another EMO in Nevada, a state where Excel does not, in New Mexico, a state where Excel does not operate. It also includes just a handful of report cards about Ohio schools and it notes that there are some Ohio closures. What Excel could have told you had they appeared before you is that until 2021, Ohio only allowed charter schools in the 5 lowest performing school districts and then the 8 lowest performing school districts in the state. Excel has been doing turnover work in Ohio, often assuming whole networks of schools at once and making decisions. We will close one. This lease is at the end. We have 25 schools in Columbus. We don't need that many, and we can consolidate. It's rebranded those schools as it's gone along. Some have performed better than others. And where it has started in a green field with a new school, it has the highest performing LEAs within the state. They could have given you those answers. That's not something you necessarily would have expected to hear from the CVLA board members. And it is certainly something that if you would think if they are allocating their time between the board's presentation and Excel's, that they would leave to the experts with Excel. I'll address the various other comments and issues that were raised both in the letter and Ms. Logue's argument, but I'll start with the reviewer comments where she said that there were findings that the various portions of the application were insufficient. In each of those cases, one dealing with EC, when the question was really, is there a provision for EC teachers? And I'll get to that one very specifically. 2, is there any experience with CTE among the EMO? And 3, some budget questions. Only one reviewer found each of those statements and responses unsatisfactory. Not the whole application, just one reviewer finding one response unsatisfactory. The other 3 found them satisfactory. So there's a significant disagreement among the staff as to those issues. I'll start with the ed plan and why, and I'll start with Ms. Hare's first question, which why pick Excel? Doesn't it not have any experience either in North Carolina or with CTE? Now, it is a typo to say that Excel is existing as an EMO in North Carolina, which is not exactly what the sentence said. It is wrong to say that Excel isn't in North Carolina. It's operating 13 early learning centers here already, so it's got a presence in the state. It wouldn't only provide 2 staff members to the school. That was a misunderstanding. It would provide all of the staff, all of the administration, the back end office, the educational program, administrative program, and oversee the technology portions of the program too. But Excel also has significant experience in CTE. No designated specific CTE schools, but 22 brick and mortar schools that are offering CTE courses now, 12 online partners that are also offering CTE to last year 2,500 students, and has completed over 6,000 CTE courses for its students and provided over 1,100 CTE credentials. It has significant experience in this, just not with the CTE school. Another reason to pick Excel is that it has shown great flexibility. Often an EMO will provide one educational model and want to franchise that everywhere. An EMO that has experience in a takeover situation has experience dealing with various models. Again, all reasons that could have supported this and could have been explained. Facility readiness was another statement, and there was significant back and forth suggesting that the only potential arrangement was a deal where Excel would have developed a school and then leased it, a building and then leased it to the school. Both the application and Ms. Isbell's comments, though, say they are considering 2 paths. One, and this was her first choice, was renting an existing facility, not from Excel. She was then asked, well, why didn't you include a statement as to what your buyout arrangement would be for the property if you lease from Excel? Well, that's an entirely hypothetical question at that point. You can't say what the buyout provision is if you don't know what the property is. You don't know what you're going to lease with. You don't know what it's going to cost to construct. And Chairman Friend said that for a regular cycle application, that's normal. And he said, quote, we've given applicants a thumbs up and they don't even know where the facility is going to be, right? There were questions about enrollment projections and financial viability. The major is this other category that Ms. Hare said needed to be very secure, if you'll remember those words, if they were going to count on it. That, and you can look in the board comments, they say Excel's going to step up. That's layman's terms for Excel's putting in money and investing in the school. And if you're going to hear that, don't you want to hear it from the horse's mouth, Excel, to say, look, we are prepared to invest $500,000 the first year and up to $1 million in the out years to get the school established. They could have explained that. That's a very secure commitment from Excel. And that would explain why so much of the budget is this other plug. There's also a question about why demand in Pender County when Pender County seems to already have so much demand for CTE programs. First, the great demand in Pender County for CTE programs would suggest that there is a demand for it. There are no programs because this would be the first that provide that tracking in middle school to go on up to high school. But a survey attached to the application and included with the application said that 63% of Pender County students that they were interviewed said CTE was very important. 32% said they believed their school did not offer it. 26% said they were unsure, and 50% said they would be likely to consider a charter school that offered it. So there very well may be demand, and there was evidence in the record for it. I touched on the education plan. There are statements, and this bounces between a budget consideration and a education consideration, that there was no provision for EC teachers. Ultimately, that was clarified, a little garbled in the record, that the budget line item was not for EC teachers as FTEs because the school was starting with 150 students. 12% is the normal, 12 to 13% is the normal expectation for EC. That they were calculating that as federally required education. That was the line item where that $250,000 exists to provide that education. And that was going to be contracted services moved over to FTEs, moved over to full-time employees as the demand materialized and as they knew that they needed to fill the demand. That was actually explained in the record. Could have been explained much better by the management company prepared to do that staffing that would have been directly responsible for that staffing and that development of that budget, but it was explained by the board. There are a lot of questions about the way the EMO contract worked. First of all, it is a draft contract. It can be renegotiated, and several of the provisions related to exclusivity and other fees were both the EMO and board said, we can renegotiate this. This is the standard EMO contract in other states, but we are open to changing this. But I want to make clear that there's a large scope of services in that contract. It's in Article 1. It includes a large set of administrative services. It includes the base AMP program, which is the student information system and learning management system. It includes IT management and support. It doesn't include things like computers, fixtures and equipment, and other software, which are things that are normally leased by schools, even EMO schools, outside the management fee. There was an agreement in the proposed contract that said you will lease these things, computers, you will lease fixtures and equipment and you will buy AMP Premium, which is their terminology under branding for the entirety of their educational content. So think all textbooks, all instructional material as separate fees. Those are typically separate fees. Mr. Eldridge said that those would be typically separate fees. You've got to lease computers somewhere. And having those as part of the integrated management agreement ensures that they're going to be consistent with the program. But both Excel and the board said we're able to negotiate that. This is a draft management agreement. Those contract provisions can come out. They're tempered by a termination clause that allows the school to terminate in any year at the conclusion of the school year. So when the board said, well, look, we've viewed these fees, they're budgeted, and they're negotiable. They are negotiable right along with the whole contract. And while there's an exclusivity provision that says Excel will be the exclusive provider of management services while the contract's in place, it can end at the end of any year for no cause at all. And there is a termination for cause provision on 30 days notice. So there's significant leverage for the for the board to renegotiate that deal with the EMO over time. But you have to understand the way the contract provisions work together in a way that the discussion with a lay board, with lay members, just did not necessarily come across, but the EMO could have explained. Again, we are not saying, and we are not trying to overreach and say that some law or policy says that there always has to be a separate and additional time. But when OCS staff understood that there would be a separate time for the EMO interview, when the review board thought there would be a separate time for the EMO interview, said during the course of the interview that there would be a separate time, and has signaled that it would be seen as detrimental for the EMO to continue answering questions in lieu of the board. And so everyone understood that there would be this time and deferred many of these explanations, including responding to the errors in that due diligence reports and the staff comments until the time for the EMO to respond. That ends up being pulling the rug out from under the school. That ends up being denying an opportunity for the school to fairly and appropriately respond. It may very well be a due process concern, but it's at least a concern for good decision making and ensuring that this school gets a full and fair shake. And frankly, the students who would be interested in attending this innovative program get a full opportunity for that type of innovation. With that, I will defer to any questions from the board, but have no further presentation.
Okay, Mr. Tilley, you have
12:32.
12 minutes remaining. So at this time, it is our opportunity, my fellow board members, for you to ask questions of the parties and gather further information. So I'll ask if either of you have questions or need further information.
This is really to both parties.
Sir.
There's been a lot of discussion, the amount of time, deferral of time, et cetera. What was the actual amount of time that was spent on the discussion between CVLA and Excel? I understand there were both representatives of both who were part of the discussion at different times. What's the total amount of the time for that discussion?
I think it ran right to an hour, sir.
Okay, if I'm looking at let me just ask, is there agreement in some general sense? I want to make sure we start from a common ground.
Yeah. My mic's not working.
Oh.
Let's see, I have it starting at 3:26 and ending. This is actually not the full thing. I'm sorry. I don't have I don't have it with me right now, but I think it's about an hour. I'll have to look.
Okay, so there's at least a general agreement between the parties,
Yes,
it
sir.
sounds like. Because I'm looking at the documentation that was sent out about timing, it appears to be 55 minutes for the EMO and CMO, both to present. So I'm trying to get a sense of I think I have a sense that you're saying there was some potential misleading comments to the effect the EMO would get to say more at the end. But it seems to me there was 60 minutes of time when only 55 was promised.
If it were the clock, sir, I wouldn't be here. That's not the point. The point from our view. The point is saying that the EMO is going to have a separate time, along with that understanding, which has been stated now at the review board numerous times, that we need to hear from the board during the board's interview time. And as Chairman Friend said, and we're going to have an opportunity to hear from the EMO after that. That's setting up of a 1-2. Essentially, if you can imagine a trial, you will hear from your expert after all of the fact witnesses have testified, counsel. Well, now that it comes time to put up the expert, no time, I'm not going to allow the expert just for time, not as for any disqualification. I just am not going to give you the opportunity.
So let me ask this question in that light. First part of the question is, do you have any idea how much time the EMO representative was speaking during this presentation time? Because it's obvious there were EMO representatives who were participating. Do you have any idea or any timing on that?
I counted not clock, but I counted three or four specific questions that she was asked by the review board. Hey, essentially there was an assent. The EMO can answer that specific question, but at the same time, again, Chairman Friend was saying, and we're going to interview the EMO next.
So along these lines, when you are here today, are you representing CVLA? You representing Excel, or are you representing both?
CVLA.
So you have no representational interest with Excel?
Not before you, no.
Well, just so we're clear on conflicts, do you have any representation for Excel outside of this matter?
No, sir. No,
Okay. The way you answered that caused me to want to make sure we have
Understood.
it clear.
Understood.
Go ahead, and I'll come back.
I'd like to just follow up on that. I just a question about that. During the hearing or towards the end, when it was clear that it was winding down, did either the CVLA board or the Excel representative ask the question, was there going to be time for the EMO to?
No, and if you look at the timestamps and the way that proceeded, Chairman Friend invited the board to get CVLA board members to give its closing statements, and within, I think it's like 7 seconds, said, and now we're going to proceed to deliberations. There was no one stood up and objected or swung their arms, said, hey, wait, I can acknowledge that, but there wasn't any opportunity for that or any acknowledgement that there was any opportunity for any further discussion.
Do you know whether the Excel representative came prepared to make a presentation?
Yes, ma'am. She was prepared. She was making notes. And Ms. Gifford is on the line. If you want to ask her directly, she said she had notes that she was prepared to present at the end, and she was saving notes because she knew that she was to let the board speak first.
Yep, she didn't say anything about the need to do that. Thank you. I'm sorry, Ellen, go ahead. That's one.
Fine. Good. Good, John.
Ms. Logue, sorry, I got a little confused. So we asked them, do you think that they understood that they were going to get separate questions for Excel, or was there ever any indication that there was going to be separate time given for them?
I have no indication that that was their understanding. There's I have not found in the transcript a discussion about a separate interview time. And at the end of every interview, there's a 10-minute allotted closing statement. So had the board felt like there had not been time to address the EMO's presentation, that would have been an opportune time. It's 10 minutes. The board can do whatever they want for their closing statement. We've had seen all kinds of different presentations during that time, and there was no discussion of that.
And that 10 seconds wasn't used.
10 minutes.
10 minutes was not.
It was used, but there was no, it was just talking about the program in Pender County and, why they want to have the charter school.
Couple more questions, Ms. Logue. When there have been EMOs in the past that are associated with the charter school application, obviously it's the applicants who would receive the charter, not the EMO. Have there been participation by the EMOs in those presentations as a regular basis, or is that something that's unusual as a starting point?
That is rare. There's usually some, we actually recommend that a representative is here so that if, a question comes up that just is very complicated or, needs that expertise from the management company, that applicant board has that person here or people here. But I can't recall in almost 8 years, a presentation by a management company. They usually sit there and they might be called up by the board. The board might say, I would like the management company to speak to that. Or sometimes a question is specifically asked to the management company, but I would say predominantly the CSRB wants to see that the board understands the agreement because they're the ones signing that contract that is essentially giving possibly millions of dollars of public funding.
So let me ask you another question along those lines. With respect to the EMO contract with the school, there appears to be both the school, CVLA, and the Excel, at some points that were pointed out by both of you in your comments, there were statements made to the effect that there's not a final contract.
Mhm.
Is it customary to approve a school without a final contract with an EMO?
They are often in the draft stages between the application period and then the final RTO approval. The RTO process, as you guys know, takes usually about 1 year to 2, depending on the timeline. That's when usually they'll be finalized and then provided to the charter board.
All right, I perhaps made this suggestion before, but I would suggest that's not the greatest procedure for the exact reason we are sitting here right now. So I'll make that suggestion yet again for the board's consideration. Because there appear to be a number of questions about the contract, and Mr. Tilley pointed out because it wasn't finalized, you couldn't give definite answers to that, which should be part of some determination about whether or not the school is really ready to open or whether or not it complies with all the requirements. So I have concerns about that in terms of what we've heard arising out of this situation, and it would be remiss not to point those out. With respect to facilities, and that was clearly illuminated that was not yet decided on it, and this perhaps for Mr. Tilley. Do you have, based on, you indicate VLA is your only client in this matter, was there an indication or any kind of discussion about if the facility was not leased, that is, was built, how that was going to be paid for? Because I think that question was asked, but I didn't see any response.
If they chose to have Excel develop the property, my understanding of the potential deal would be that Excel would in consultation with CVLA, pick a site. Excel would buy it, Excel would develop it, and then lease it to the school. The school found that its first protection, the big concern is cut the management agreement, you may be cutting your building, right? You don't want those two tied together. That's the reason that the CSRB asked about the buyout provision. Do you have a way to protect yourself if you cut the management agreement? The school views its first protection in that arrangement as the term of the lease. Just because you cut a management agreement does not mean you've cut the term of the lease. Those two need to not be tied. They need to be independent. And Ms. Isbell numerous times said, we understand those need to be independent. We also want a buyout provision. A buyout provision may be cold comfort if you can't come up with the money. And so, as I said, this board really viewed the independence of the lease and the management agreement as its primary protection. But the arrangement would be Excel buying, developing the property, serving as landlord, and then leasing the property to the school.
Based on that discussion, would the leaser have the right to sell out its ownership interest in the property?
We were not
In
there.
other words, collateralize it.
We were not there. We haven't had that portion of the discussion yet.
So that was not a decided part of the discussion
No,
at
sir.
that point.
No, sir.
Are you aware of that as a practice?
Yes.
And with respect to if the school were to go out of business at some point, who would the property belong to?
Well, the property belongs to the landlord. So if the school goes out of business, the landlord is left with the property without a tenant. Often that arrangement puts a lot of pressure, frankly, on the landlord / management company to make sure the school is operating, and frankly puts more pressure on the EMO to support the operations of the school on an operational budget of the school through contribution.
The school's operational budget comes from state and or federal or even local dollars,
Yes, sir.
all three. And that's the basis for paying out the lease. Presumably, ultimately, in these leases, you would ultimately buy the property over some period of time, or are there not usually provisions to that effect?
Normally there is a discounted buyout at the end of the lease.
So given that just from our board standpoint, being stewards of North Carolina citizens' dollars,
Mhm.
why would it be so clear that the landlord would own it when it's really been paid for by state, local, and federal dollars?
Well, sir, you asked kind of sort of what's the general approach and what's Excel's approach. I don't know that we had a full discussion of Excel of all the options that it would, whether this would be a financing lease, to use that term, or a straight, a straight lease for a term, and how the buyout provision would work together. That would all have to be negotiated. And would be potential arrangements. I am aware that there are many financing leases in charter schools from other developers, but that's not necessarily the way that Excel works here. And I believe Excel's statement is that most of the school, I think it is not, most of its portfolio managed schools are actually not in an Excel developed or owned building.
There were some questions asked along these lines. Would you agree that it was appropriate for the board to ask about what the financial arrangements would be with respect to the facility?
100%. I would want them to get it right.
So would you agree then that not knowing what those financial arrangements are make it difficult to make a decision about whether or not a school would really be ready to open or an application ready to be granted within that time frame?
I agree with that, but I mean, on a regular open cycle, when you're talking about 2 years out, most schools, and this is Chairman Friend's statement in the hearing, and no one contradicted him. In fact, people nodded along or echoed it, that on a regular open cycle where you're talking about a school 2 years or more out to open, the facility normally isn't arranged. If you can imagine, someone would have had to have bought that property on the come, expecting that there would be an application granted, or excuse me, a charter granted, and had been prospecting at that level. That's an awful lot of investment risk. And so most of the time that's not there. If you're just leasing an existing property, an old church, a Kmart or a strip mall that you are going to retrofit, those leases do not get signed up 2 years out. So really it's almost the market conditions make that very difficult if you want a 2-year lead time between application and opening.
So if I could try to summarize and correct me if I'm on path or not on path, but I want to make sure at this point you're asking us to not make any decisions about the various concerns Charter School Review Board raised as to why it may not believe the school to be ready, but rather you're suggesting that we remand it for further consideration because of questions about whether or not there was enough time for the school to make its presentation, including whatever Excel would have added to the discussion.
Yeah, yes, sir. I mean, and there was significant confusion among the review board members. One review board member cited conflicts of interest, suggesting that there would be EMO employees sitting on the board. That was clearly not the case. Ms. Hare said that she had not heard enough about the CTE program, the connection between the school's mission and the EMO, something the EMO could have clarified about its experience in other conditions. And Chairman Friend even said, yeah, I don't disagree. We really didn't get into the actual tell us about your curriculum. This is at 4:38:58 on the transcript. I don't know that that's the board's fault. We didn't ask them that question. So even Chairman Friend, the day of the hearing, said we didn't get to the ed plan. If the ed plan was a basis for some of the review board members to not get there, it would have been really good to have spent some time on that. I think that's part of what motivated the 5-5 deadlock that on Mr. Friend's vote the next day to reconsider and instead bring this board back. There was one board member absent. It was Stephen Gay. He voted for this application the day before. You could anticipate from that maybe where he might come. But all we're asking this board to do is simply what Chairman Friend was trying to do the next day, open it back up for reconsideration to answer the questions that at least 5 board members felt there was reason to consider.
Let me ask one last question that your answer just raised that will be helpful in terms of someone raised a conflict question. Would you consider it a conflict if the principal of the school is employed by the EMO and had a differing interest than those who held the charter?
No, sir, because if you think about it, the principal is the direct report to the board and accountable to the board, so is the EMO. And so in both cases, the board, the nonprofit, would be in a position to hold that person accountable. When the principal is an EMO employee, they definitely have to be recognized that, right? Know who's reporting to you and understand it. But I don't view that as a conflict of interest because he's not a board officer.
In order to consider what possible conflicts could arise, you would have to have the certainty of what an agreed upon negotiated contract looked like and whether it otherwise complied with the concerns that may have been raised by the board.
Yes, sir. I will point out that this particular contract makes clear in a provision in a specific section in it that no employees of the EMO shall be on the board. So that there's a provision actually in the contract that would prevent any of the conflicts of interest we're talking about.
Is that in there because you're aware other EMO providers do in fact have members of the EMO on board?
Sir, with that, you'd have to ask Excel. I've never asked them specifically. It was in their draft.
But those are the questions I have about. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Kamnitz?
While we're talking about contracts, just for clarity, Ms. Loeb, when there is a final contract between a board and an EMO, does your office or legal review that contract before it is finalized?
Once they, I wouldn't say that we do it before it's finalized. Usually when they send it to us, like if it's not final in the application and then it gets finalized during the ready to open process, they'll submit that to us and then we'll submit it to, in this case, we've been submitting it to Stephen Walker for the CSRB.
Okay, right.
Yeah. And sometimes they are final when it's an application. It really depends. Some are draft and some are already final, and that makes it obviously a little bit easier. And then Stephen can review it and let the board know if there's any concerns.
There's not always an assurance that a red flag doesn't get noticed before the contract is signed.
Right.
Is that correct? And one more question for you. I'm a little concerned about the issue of Excel not having operated in North Carolina. And you talked about the work that OCS had done to really look at whether Excel was ready to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any, do you have to approve the EMO or that's just something you do as sort of in an abundance of caution?
Right. We just do it as like a matter of due diligence to try to really just provide the board with some basics about, what are the, in this case, where are they operating? There's, several different iterations of Excel schools and multiple, LLCs in multiple states, so that they can try to understand what this company looks like, in case that, provides any kind of questioning or leads to something they want to discuss in the interview.
Okay, so there's no official process where an HMO has to get an approval or an EMO has to get an.
No, we typically feel that if the application with a new EMO is approved, then that is like an approval of the EMO, essentially,
Right.
in practice.
Right.
Mhm.
And then, this question, I guess, to both of you, am I understanding correctly that the original time frame for this was an hour and a half?
Yes,
Like on the agenda,
yes,
and only an hour was used?
yes.
Okay,
We allot an hour and a half for applications with management companies. We allot an hour for standard non-management company applications. Those are sometimes applications go on for an hour and a half, 2 hours if there's a
Right.
lot of questions, and sometimes they last 40 minutes.
okay, all right, thank you.
While you're there, Ms. Logue, remind me of the time frame again. So just go back through when you offered them to meet with you and
Oh, okay. So they would have submitted the application. We would have started reviewing in April. They received, I think, in July, notice of their interview month. So that would have been November. They asked for December. So whatever, July to December, they had to ask questions.
John, can I ask one more? Yes. I had understood that the discussion part, that is if you look at what was sent out in terms of first round interviews, it was 25 minutes or 55 minutes if an EMO was involved. That is, it was a longer period of time given. Are you saying the totality of this meeting was about an hour, or were you saying the totality of the time set aside for the 55 minutes was an hour? That is, was it overtime for that, or was the entirety of the meeting an hour?
No, the entirety of the interview is an hour and a half. That includes the introduction, the board statement, 55 minutes for discussion, and then 10 minutes for closing statement, 10 minutes for deliberation. Those are,
Just so we're completely clear
Yeah.
then, the time for discussion, the 55 minutes that was set out,
Mhm.
because an EMO was part of the application here,
mhm.
that lasted for an hour? Or did the whole hearing last for an hour?
The whole hearing, I think it was an hour and 8 minutes, I think, the entire interview.
you agree with
It's going to cause me to ask a couple questions about how long was the introduction period and how long was the applicant board opening statement?
Let me look at the transcript. I'll have to add those times up.
Okay, I'm now, just to be completely transparent, trying to get at whether or not the 55 minutes was used up.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
8 minutes, yeah.
For the
An hour and
discussion.
8 minutes from start to finish, apparently,
Yeah.
68 minutes.
I mean, I thought that's what I thought I was asking Ashley, if on the agenda of the CSRB, it was an hour and a half.
That would be the total time,
Mhm.
yes. But they went an hour and 8, as it turned out, in the, in 50.
Okay, I see, okay. Okay.
Yeah, I'd have to look at the transcript. So we will usually cut off at the opening statement, we have actually little placards that go up for, 1 minute remaining, 2 minutes remaining, whatever. So I'd have to look and see if they use their full, I don't know that they use the full 10 minutes for the closing statement for sure. But I'd have to look and see how long that 55 minutes Q&A portion actually took.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds like from what you have said, the CVLA was offered the closing statement, didn't make one.
They made one,
They
but
did.
that's after the Q&A section. So my point is, they had 10 minutes. If they wanted to add additional information about the management company, have the management company speak, say that they had more information to give, or that they were confused about the procedure, they could have done that in those 10 minutes.
Okay, and that's helpful to say, but that counts in the total time of the hour and 8 minutes too, right?
Yes.
Whatever they did
Mhm.
say. So I'm starting to feel like the time that was used during the 55 minute of the EMO, CMO time that was available might not have been completely used. Is that right?
I'd have to look, yeah.
You mind looking?
Yeah.
Just so we've got, just because it's become a question here, let's try to be accurate.
I have the discussion starting at 3:30:05 on the transcript and ending at 4:24. 3, so
That'd be-
30, 54 minutes.
54 minutes. Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Mr. Tilley, you have an opportunity. You have 12 minutes left if you'd like to make a rebuttal.
I will only make one statement here as to the timing. And again, as I said, if it were just the clock, we wouldn't be here. But it's this statement. Ms. Rackley said that there would be time at 3:16 during OCS's presentation to interview the proposed management organization. And Chairman Friend at 3:58:02 said, just for clarification, the time we have left is with the board. We're going to still interview the EMO. So regardless of how that clock ran, which obviously the interviewee standing at the podium is not running the clock, there was an understanding that there was a separate time coming, and it would have been separate from that closing statement. So, you're putting an awful burden on an applicant and their EMO partner to say, well, they didn't ask any clarifying questions as to a procedure that it seemed like was understood, and then truncated at the very, very end, because it would require them to interrupt in a place where you might be doing as much damage as you would anything else to try to interrupt, wave your arms and scream, right? So it places an awful burden on the applicant to try to say that the applicant should be running the time clock as opposed to the board. No further comments.
Thank you, parties, for your participation. The panel will now deliberate and vote on a recommended decision. I make a motion that we go into closed session pursuant to General Statute 143-318-11A3 to consult with legal counsel. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Fafario, will you call the roll?
Ms. Kamnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Blackburn.
Yes. I would remind the parties that when we come out of closed session, we will go back into open session. I call the open meeting back to order, and I will read a motion to you, giving you the decision that the review panel is making. I move that we recommend to the State Board of Education that it vote to remand this matter to the Charter School Review Board for consideration at its March 2026 meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion?
Yeah, I would like to say that when we remand it to the meeting, it should be for the limited purpose of allowing Excel to make whatever comments that it deems appropriate that it was not able to make based on the presentation that's been made. And it's important to note, I think, from this panel standpoint at least, and I can't speak for the board at this point, but from this panel standpoint, this was a process concern, and it was presented as a process concern as we heard it from counsel for CVLA, and we want to make sure that process is proper as we go through these considerations. That being said, in no way should this remand be considered a suggestion that the application should either be accepted or rejected. This is not something to suggest that the application should be approved. It's to suggest that the panel have the CSRB have the opportunity to consider whatever additional information would be presented and then to make its decision, but should not be considered anything other than that.
Thank you. Mr. Fafario, will you call the roll, please?
Ms. Kamnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Blackburn.
Yes. The panel's recommended decision will be reduced to writing and shared with the parties as soon as possible. The item will be up for discussion in the EICS committee on February 4, 2026, and the final decision at the February 5th, 2026 meeting of the State Board of Education. Ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Ferrario, will you call the roll, please?
Ms. Kamnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Blackburn.
Yes, we stand adjourned.